Hello everybody and welcome to another hobby cheating video, and today we're going to talk about some green orc skin. So I've recently done some iron jaws and some people asked me how to do the green skin, and so we're going to walk through that today. This is a very minty green skin. It's a color I like. I don't like yellow-green orcs. One of the fascinating things about green is that it has a wonderful range that really has a different sort of vibrancy to it, depending on what other colors you add to it. When you have more brown in it, because there's a higher shade of red and you get sort of a green-brown, it can look very earthy. Green-yellow can look very putrid, and of course green-white, I feel, looks very cold and, you know, I'd say, I don't know, like a fresh sprig of mint. So, what we've got here is we've got a brute, and he's been zenithal, but a little more. If I turn him like that, you can kind of see the red. Yeah, there you go. You can see that red under there. So, in between the gray and the white, we applied some Model Air Whole Red. Now, the reason I did that is because red is the complementary color to green. Often when people paint flesh shade, which has a lot of pink in it, they'll use green as a base in things like in painting on a canvas. We're using the same principle here to deepen our shadows and to eliminate the blacks. So, we're going to go ahead and use our new airbrush here as well. This is a Grex XG2, so this is a 20 millimeter, 0.2 millimeter, sorry, 20 millimeter, huge needle. 0.2 millimeter needle. We're running at 18 psi, and we've thinned this down to a pretty reasonable glaze. So we're just going to go ahead and apply a very light coat here. We're just barely rocking the trigger back. Now, a lot of this is going to end up being covered by armor, so we're kind of aware of that as we're doing it, but that's okay. It's still a good chance to see the skin. Things like the hands and the face will not be. Now you'll notice where that red is, as soon as the green hits it, it's not red anymore, because the two sort of immediately balance each other out. So you can see right now, see if I can get that in camera, there you go, you can still kind of see the red, but then if I lay the green in there, it just kind of instantly goes away and becomes sort of a deeper shade. And you can see how wonderful that cuts the shadows. That looks very blue on camera. It's not quite that blue in reality. Okay. This guy's also got bare feet, which is nice, because then we have another chance to see it somewhere else too. The other reason I use the whole red is because I'm going to use whole red in the base when I do the lava. And doing things like that, it's a small thing, but it can help tie the whole model together. As I've said many times, subconsciously your brain realizes when things fit together as opposed to not. So even though you couldn't consciously tell when you look at a piece that in fact there's the same color worked in throughout it, if you've ever looked at something and thought, wow, those colors just look so rich or seem to belong, well, chances are that's because the artist made sure to create harmony by having the color spread throughout. So we've got our nice little minty green orc. Now, what color? I should have stated what colors these were to begin with. So this is a 3-to-1 of Arfin Jade from scale 75. 3-to-1-to-1. And then Hellbound Flesh, also from scale 75, Fantasy and Games. And then finally, Miskatonic Gray. So 3-1-1. Any sort of jade green plus a very faded white green and a sort of gray purple will get you where you need to go. Now, what we're going to do from here is I'm going to get rid of some of the paint here. I'm going to go ahead and put another drop of thinner in. And now we're going to take some of that, more of that Miskatonic Gray and some Game Air Pale Flesh, and we're going to mix about 2 drops of each of those into the existing mix. So I didn't change my paint. I'm not dumping anything out. I'm just going to straight add some more paint in to build up my highlights. And this first one we're going to be a little subtle with. We don't want to push this too far. I know that seems like a lot, adding 4 drops of this non-green paint, but keep in mind, you know, this green is very powerful. And we're applying it very thinly. So as a result, even making a jump like that we're not really going to move the needle very much here. Okay? So, all right. There we go. So now we've got something about that color, a little bit lighter. Mix that up. And there we go. Got a nice solid flow. Okay, so now from a high angle, I'm going to just very carefully lay it in here. So top of the head, and I'm just rocking the trigger back and forth very carefully. Like with a 0.2, you can actually get in there and do individual muscles, as you can see there. So I can be very, very precise. Oop, a little bit of overspray there. That's okay if that happens. No big deal. Okay. Focus a little bit on the muscles there. Top of the fingers. We're just operating from a high angle and making sure that we hit all of our high spots. So what we did there is really just reinforce those highlights, right? Okay. So now, once again, we're going to get rid of most of our paint there. Apologize, we're going to have to turn that on for just a second. That's going to be loud, but I'd rather not die. Okay, there we go. Now we're going to go ahead and blow most of that paint out. Still keep the green just kind of in the bottom of the cup. And we're going to go almost into a straight pale flesh. There we go. Good. So basically you can see down in there, I have just the green that's left in there. I'm going to put about 3 drops of regular pale flesh in there. And add some more thinner. Because again, we want to keep this operating very thin, very smooth. We don't want any speckling, anything like that. Okay. There we go. So now we test on the back of the hand. Got a nice thin, straight flow. Okay, now same thing. Now we're going to focus in on the tops of the muscles here. Knuckles, you know, just get some nice, bright spots in there. We really want to make sure that face is well highlighted because that's still going to show. And that needs to be the center of our focal point, right? Like when this guy is all armored up, after we're all done with him, his feetsies are still going to be exposed. Of course, we can highlight them appropriately, but we'll bring them back down later through like pigments and dirt and stuff like that. Because of course, this dude's walking around barefoot. He's you know, he ain't keeping clean. That's just how it goes. These brutes, you know, they're not exactly taking a lot of baths, I would guess. I don't know. I don't ask them personally about it, but it seems unlikely. I'll openly admit it hasn't come up in my conversations with them so far, but I don't think they bathe much. Okay, so now we've got this nice, high, very bright, white, almost scheme, right? We've really pushed it up. Maybe a little bit more here on just the very top of the back. Yeah, there we go. And if you can, it's hard for you to see my finger, but like when I'm rocking it, I'm moving my finger that much. An imperceptible amount. Because you just want to touch it. You'll notice I hold it like this, like I would a pen, so I can control it with my thumb. If I just use my finger, I have less control. When I put my thumb underneath, I can help to balance it. So, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little break, get my paint completely emptied out, clean my airbrush, and I come back and we're going to talk about how we slowly build in the shadows and restore some solid midtones. So, we will be back in just a moment. Alright, and we're back. So, Oric's all nice and dry. And, you know, one of the reasons we always work some kind of flesh tone into our highlights as opposed to using white is it's going to make the model seem more human. Flesh tones all have some kind of pink in it, something like that. Now, when we move back over the painting desk and really draw out the highlights, you're going to see how we continue to build some life into this model. But for right now, what we need to do is get our shadows sort of built up again. So to do that, we're going to use some P3 turquoise ink. And so we've loaded that and thinned that a little bit. Now, when working with thinned inks, you have to be very, very, very careful, because if you apply too much, it will immediately start to run, and you don't want that. You want it to just be a very light touch. You're just literally laying it up in there, just barely rocking that trigger. And again, this time, just like before, we went from the very high angle. Now we're going from the very low angle, right? So we're kind of always pointing up at the model. And again, this will help to kind of flow in there where we had maybe some of that red still showing. It'll tint that and turn it into a nice shadow color. And we want to kind of focus a little bit over what we did before, but not all the way. We're just enriching those tones. Using an ink as sort of to bring back this color as well has the nice effect of sort of getting rid of some of the obvious airbrushness to look that has this hyper blend, because it adds a little more volume and kind of can get rid of any speckling if you got that going on. Can handle all that. So, you know, inks as a sort of step in the middle of your airbrushing, I very, very highly recommend. It's basically how you can build sort of a richness back into it. You know, professional, like people who do airbrush art, often use thinned, transparent type paints for the same purpose. They use it as filters and things like that to build some richness back into the what they're painting, and prevent that sort of over, I don't know what to call it, frosted look, I guess. So there we go. Now you can see how we've got some of those rich tones back in there. Now, we still need to establish some very deep shadows. So for that, we're going to leave that turquoise ink in there. I'm going to grab some of my whole red. Now, why am I going to red? Why not black or something else? Well, one, this guy is going to be standing over lava. Like, as a point of fact, that's where this model will end up. But secondly, red is being the complementary color. Now, this is a very brown red. But red being the complementary color to green, it's going to wonderfully form a nice desaturated tone when we get it in there. So the advantage to using that as opposed to black is it's going to be a richer set of information for the eye. Because just using black, I mean, you'll achieve a shadow, but it's not a very, but as a data set for the eye, like what the eye is taking in, it isn't very visually interesting. That's the challenge. Keeping colors that desaturate things, make it more, make the color less, the main color less flat, make it appear more alive. And again, what's the other thing we're going for? This is still an orc, right? And so, of course, there's blood under that skin. This is a living being. Red tones are generally regarded as the thing that makes living beings look alive. So we'll test there. We got a nice sort of brown tone. And then we're just going to lay this up into the sort of very deep shadows. But those red-infused tones are what make your model seem alive. Spray that up into the mouth a little bit there. Get rid of the green in there. Make my life easier later. But it's that feeling that there's blood under there. There's something under there besides just orkiness. And this model is a real living thing. And those additions of those red tones are what makes that happen. So, Again, these are just some light touches. We're just kind of getting it in there, setting ourselves up for later. We can still reinforce a lot of this with the brush, but very, very light touches with this. Just to make sure we have some nice shadows established. Alrighty. And there we go. So now we've got our base all down. Not too bad, pretty quick. And so now we're going to take him back over to the painting desk, and we'll do the rest of this with the brush. So, back in just a moment. Alright, and we're back. We're over at the painting desk now. And you can see that our little orc, I went ahead and did the armor because I wanted to see how that color was going to balance out against him. Being the other chief primary color, I wanted to get an idea of how that was going to look before I proceeded with the skin tone. So, where we're at right now, we've got the airbrush laid down, and, you know, he's fine. Now, a lot of this is going to get covered by his armor plates, okay? So, for example, here's the actual armor plate that's going to go on this guy, and if we pop it on, we can see that's where that's going to sit. Now, there's also a front piece. It's very instructive because we want to make sure that, you know, we don't... I like to make sure what's underneath the armor is painted because you can see it sometimes if you kind of tilt the model in a weird direction. But that being said, let's not go to the nines for something that nobody physically can see. So it's good to keep an idea of that. That being said, his face, the center of this model... This guy's got the funniest face, by the way. That's why I picked this one. This is like the doofy orc. The face is obviously the center point of our model and very visible. So what we're going to do here is, first off, we're going to add 2 additional colors to our skin mix. So I'm working with the same skin mix as last time. My green, my Hellbound Flesh, my Miskatonic Gray, and my Pale Flesh. But in addition, we are going to add some Warcolors Violet 3 and some Fantasy Games Orcish Dermis. Love this color. So one of the tricks with orcs in their green skin is to have little touches of pink in there. You often see it around the lips, the nose. When you see people do larger scale orcs, they really are able to work this in. But like the nose, the lips, the ears, the elbows, if they're visible, like this guy has a slightly visible elbow right there. Great places to work in those pinks. It can really make a big difference. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get his mouth kind of covered in there. I just want to get some darker color in there. So for that, I'm going to take a little bit of some whole red, the previous shadow color that I used for a lot of the model, mix it with a little bit of purple just to get it a little bit of that purple tinge in there. Mix it with just a tiny touch of my Orcish Dermis. So what I get is a color that looks like that. Okay. And we're just going to kind of force that back in there. We're not being too picky about it. I just like to get this base laid down. I'm not going to paint the whole mouth. Oops, sorry. I just like to get this base laid down. I'm not going to paint the whole mouth because I don't want to... it's not really what we're talking about. But I like to get that nice base laid in there just so I can... Because when you're slapping that amount of paint around, I don't want to do a bunch of work on the face and then accidentally get some of that spread over. Plus, it'll give me sort of a color value setting of what that mouth is going to look like. Now, when it's done, of course, I'll shade some of it and, you know, bring up some highlights on the tongue, and the teeth will be colored and stuff like that. But for now, what we're going to do is we're going to go and we're going to get sort of our darker green. And so for this, we're using our Arfin Jade, and we're going to mix that down with a little bit of that whole red. I know I didn't mention the whole red in my color scheme. That is sort of the hidden color here. It's one of my shadow colors. But it's basically just any dark red. You can also use a little black in there if you want. That's fine. I prefer to use a little color so we get a little contrasting color. Okay. So now that I've got a really dark shadow color, looks something like that, what I want to do is really layer in those areas, just very quickly, just hit those areas that are going to have very deep, deep shadows. So around the eyes, we're going to get inside the nose, under the nose, because this guy has a very, orcs have very pronounced little peaky noses. and just up under the ears. Basically, we're going to very carefully pick that stuff out. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a nice fine line here in between the teeth and the lips. And I don't care about, you notice I'm dragging it down on the teeth? Yeah, I don't care. That's why I didn't paint the teeth yet. But what that does is give me a nice separation shadow there between that. Now, what we're going to do now is basically start building in. Now that we've got those little deeper shadows done, we just want to get some darker color, a little more of the green, and start very lightly working it in. So we thin this down to a glaze, and we can see that there are nice creases on this guy's head. So he's got some right here, so let's lay some of that up there. Maybe a little more there. Down under the eye. This is also why I don't paint the eyes first, by the by. Because you're going to screw up your eyes. He's got some nice creases in his forehead where he's like angrily squinting. So we're just going to put a little color in there. Kind of pull that out. This is very small controlled work. Okay? So now you can see he's got a little more color. We're starting to pick that out. Okay. We're actually going to switch to an even smaller brush here. I'm going to go to a 00. Because really what I want to do now is I want to start popping out some of these items. And we want to start getting that pink tone in there. So I'm going to take a little of that Orcish Dermis, which is this wonderful pinky tone. And I'm going to mix it with some of my Harvester Flesh. That's sort of a little bit of pale skin. Just kind of get a nice highlight pink color with just a hint of the green to desaturate it down. So I end up with something like that. You can see that's not super pink. And what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and hit his lip here. I'm going to get the outer ring of his mouth. Make sure that's nice and called out. I'm also going to get some of his top lip. Very lightly. This is like hyper detail work here. Because where this is hitting, his lip is hitting, you know, sort of this part of his mouth, we want to create this little visual color interest. And a little bit of pink onto that green will really pop that out. I'm also going to get his little piggy nose. Just some very light touches to get that piggy nose. I'll probably pull some down here on the side. There we go. And then we want to get his ears inside these ears, right? We don't want to do the whole ear. We're not turning his ear pink. We're really just aiming at a tiny little touch inside the ear. Right? So now what we have is something that has a little more color. We're also going to come over here and hit his elbow. If there's other little spots, like I like to do the knuckles, I think it's a nice place where you can put in some good visual interest. Knuckles tend to be stretched flesh. So it can be a nice little touch. You can work a little in here where there might be some, you know, where like there'd be visible veins. We can come back and smooth all that out too. Like one of the nice parts here about doing this is you can fade this really easy when you're working with this color. Because if we just come back with our original green, it's going to pretty much kill it really fast. Because that's the advantage of working with these sort of complementary colors, is that they tend to cancel each other out pretty quick. We're also going to put just a little bit into his forehead. So you can see now, look at how much more alive that guy looks now. Now, he's got a doofy face, as it is. He always has. And we don't judge him for that. That's okay. But you can see how the addition of that pink and the red of his mouth and things like that has really brought him to life. Okay? So the next thing I want to do is take some of that color and, again, grab a little bit of my darker whole red just so I get kind of a shadowed version of that color. And over on my palette, I'm just slowly working versions in, but what I get now is something like that. And now we're going to create some shadows in the places where we need to, like maybe here on the side of the jaw, just very quickly. Here on his nose, we want to get some shadow worked in there. Here in his ear, like up at the top, we want to get some shadow in there because it shouldn't all be that same universal pink. Okay. Over here on the elbow, he's got nice little wrinkles. He's got a nice little wrinkled elbow. So we'll kind of put some of that in there. Back to the knuckles, maybe just a little bit. We can just feather that a little bit. Just get a hint of that in there, right? Okay. You can also take this color, this sort of now shadowed red dermal flesh you've gotten, and you can turn it into a very thin glaze. See how thin that is? That's thin. And what we're going to do with that is we're going to create some more interest down here in the shadows, where we just work some reds into these tones. Side of the head, on his cheeks, right? Under his eye. Just little touches that create some more visual sort of confusion where that pink is living. A little more blood under the surface. I don't know if orcs are supposed to have red blood. They're probably supposed to have green blood. But that's silly. Red is what, like, it doesn't matter what the orc is supposed to have. Human beings read red and pink as life. Your eyes read that as life. A corpse is gray and cold and blue and purple. A living thing is red and warm and yellow. It's just how your brain works. Okay? All right, so now we've got a lot of different little colors laid down, and we've got some good interest in his face. But we need to pop him up just a little bit. So my last step is we're going to take him all the way up and give him some nice highlights. So here I'm going to go into my harvester flesh and mix that pretty directly with a little bit of my pale flesh and my gray. Like, so that's really, those are really the winning colors here. We're getting something pretty light. Okay? So that's where we're at for that. And now what we want to do is we just want to make sure we're catching all those spots that should really be popping out. Top of the eye. Top of the nose. And we'll create some little, on the edge of lips, it's good to just make little tiny hashes, because these lips tend to have that kind of texture in them, so we kind of just go hash, hash, hash. See what I'm doing there? I know it's very small and probably nearly impossible to see. And then we want to hit the edge of these cheeks. Now, because we've got the same base harvester green here we used for everything else, it still falls in line pretty easy. And because we're still working in very thin paint, we can just very carefully push this up until we get to the highlight point we want. Nice, light touches. Just very, very gentle on this tiny, tiny face. We'll also hit the edge of his ears. Make sure those pop out. He's got these wonderful ears. These brutes, look at those wonderful ears he's got. Looks like a bat. Okay. We can even come back and get like the bottom of the ear. Nope, too much. That happens sometimes. There we go. That's why we work with thin, wet paint. So when we make a mistake, we can just pull it out. Okay. we go. Nice little subtle, gentle highlights that just make sure that the top of this model and the face of this model is what pops the most, because that's what we want. And there we go. Basically, I would just repeat that around the rest of the skin. So the rest of the skin that's visible is going to have much the same sort of treatment. That is to say, most of these muscles aren't really too visible, so I'm not hyper concerned about them. But like, if I wanted to very quickly show you, for example, what I was going to do over here on this elbow, since some of that's in shadow, I'll take some of my deeper shadow color with some of my green, work it down to a thin glaze, and then just kind of get that pushed back in there. Same with over here on the hand. We just want to make sure we're pulling those shadows in. We're just having nicely, really well-defined shadows. I'll work in some glazes of that whole red in the same way down here into the shadows. Just making some very subtle transitions with this because we don't need to go crazy with it. Again, much of this isn't even visible on the model, so we don't want to go too far. The face is what you see. My old rule is faces, bases, shields, and banners. That's what people see when they look at models. But this guy has some wonderful musculature, and a little bit of it's visible, so it's fun to play around with. You know, this is just me. You can see I'm literally just working in some glazes of this whole red. Nothing else I'm doing here. Just playing with it, kind of pushing it into some lower areas. And you can see there on that muscle, see that slight pink hue? See how much more visually interesting that is because that's in there? It's the little touches like that that make things really pop. So we just repeat that with his feet, with his hands. You know, those are the things that are going to stay visible, so you want to make sure those pop out. The feet I often find less essential when he's got these feet out. You can work a lot of nice colors in, but this guy's a barefoot orc running around on volcanic ground, so, you know, he's going to end up having dirty feet, like I'll be putting pigment and stuff on there. So, again, because I know I'm going to cover a bunch of it, I don't go as far as we possibly could. But there you go. There's our finished orc. He's all ready to go. Well, I mean, I'm going to do teeth and eyes, but there's his finished skin. Look at how angry he looks. So I hope you can see how the addition of carefully cutting out some of those shadows, the use of complementary colors, especially on orcs, such as the reds and pinks and slight hits of purple, can really help to accentuate the living nature of the creature, make it feel more alive, and the high contrast of having, you know, a very few high spots of this light that really makes sure your eyes go zip, and when they look at the center of the model, they see something very visually interesting. So, there you go. I hope you found this video on orcish skin tone, minty orcish skin tone interesting. If you did, give it a like. Subscribe for more hobby cheating in the future. Share this with someone you know is working on orcs or would like some fun green skin tips. That's always the nicest thing you can do. But as always, it's very much appreciated, and we'll see you next time.